Hi, my name is Angie, Power Disney, and I'm going to start a new book reading of another rare book, actually more rare than the Children for the Devil series, which I just finished by Tim Tate. And this one, when it's available, is about $15,000 to buy. That's how rare it is. But somebody with a manuscript has sent me a copy. So without much further ado, I'll start this. There are 3 books, authoritative, scholarly, researched, referenced, footnoted, indexed books on the subject of satanic ritual abuse. And the author, I think it's a husband and wife team, I believe they're not alive anymore. So it's a dangerous thing that they did, documenting what they did, and may have paid dearly for it. So I'll start this. And thanks to Craig McGowan. Share screen. Here we go. So this is called Cover Up of the Century. Satanic Ritual, Crime and World Conspiracy by Daniel Ryder. And we'll start with chapter 1. The third book of the trifecta. Craig hasn't been able to get hold of a copy yet. He knows what it is and he dearly would like one. I'll announce it somewhere at the end of this audio reading. So, minor chastisement. After this book was released, I came across information so compelling, I put the book on hold until this insert was added. In light of this information, it appears some of what is being written about the end times may be somewhat off. See chapter 16. While the evolving world system, brackets New World Order, is in my opinion quite evil and driven by Satan, it seems it may not be the Antichrist phenomenon written about in the Bible's Book of Revelation, Book of Daniel, and so on. Author Desmond Birch in Trial, Tribulation and Triumph, brackets before, during and after Antichrist, extensively cites church fathers' teachings and Catholic saints' prophecies spanning some 19 centuries that not only appear to match up, but indicate an end-time scenario, again, a bit different than what's been forecast in many circles. In this scenario, because of divine justice and mercy, God may be forced to allow the world to experience a, quote, minor chastisement that includes a pretty devastating mix of wars, famines, earthquakes, and other natural disasters, the beginnings of which may well be happening now around the globe. And as this gets more intense, says Birch, it will seem like the end of the world to some. However, prophecy indicates God will bring an end to all this with the 3 days of darkness, a time when fire will rain down from the sky, as it did on Sodom and Gomorrah, destroying most of the evil and ushering in an era of peace. Brackets, the chastisement can be mitigated, even averted, with prayer, sacrifice, and penance. Either way, there will be an era of peace where a last Holy Roman Empire will rise up over the entire earth, according to these teachings and prophecies, writes Birch. And everyone will go back to one faith, Roman Catholic. However, the empire is eventually divided into 10 kingdoms, and in the midst of all the prosperity, people's faith grows lax, which gives way to the entry of the real Antichrist, Birch continues. He is a man totally possessed by Satan and reigns for about 3.5 years. He deceives many into thinking he is the Messiah. Birch further claims the prophecies and teachings indicate. Then the Antichrist is brought down by the power of God. After this, there is a brief period for those left on earth to come to God. And finally, there is Jesus' second coming and the final judgment. Quote, however, as I note at the end of chapter 16, we must be keenly aware of the evil, quote, systems that are currently evolving. Brackets, modern day visionary Joseph Terrellia, based on messages he's been getting, believes we're facing the spirit of the Antichrist in our current world situation. Joseph Terrellia. What's more, I believe we are currently being called to make some tough lifestyle decisions as to whether to participate in much of it, if at all. That's for each person's own prayerful discernment. Cover-up of the Century, Satanic Ritual, Crime and World Conspiracy by Daniel Ryder. Ryder Publishing. This is the second edition from 1994. All rights reserved. Craig has been in communication with the publishers. Copy editor, Shelley McClough. Printed in the USA. The Story of a Skull. We've gone with using a skull on the front cover, not to shock, but to convey what appears to be a gruesome truth. One people all over the world need to come to grips with. On an investigative swing down the East Coast a couple of years ago, I was in Columbia, South Carolina, the week a partial human skull was discovered out in some backwoods in the small town of Lexington, just southeast of Columbia. No one seemed to know where the skull had come from. In the early 80s, a partial human skull was found in some woods near Fitchburg, Massachusetts. Initially, this discovery was a mystery too. But with some good investigative work, it was discovered this was a victim of a satanic cult sacrifice. The cult's high priest was convicted. What you have to wonder is how many more partial skulls are out there if we looked, really looked. It's my bet there are a lot. Dedication. This book is dedicated to all those working to expose this insidious evil in our midst. That's nice. Acknowledgements. To God, to my wife Liz, for your courage, support, research help, coordinating efforts. Oh yeah, and for late night prayers on the way to town. To Janice and Dick Lord and family for all the help and support on the project. To Dave and Shelley McClough for your friendship, belief in the project, support and advocacy for survivors. To Connie and her friend for the editorial support. To ritual crime investigators Randy Cerny, Andrew Casarda, John Hunt, Jerry Simandi, Dale Griffith, and all the others out there risking their lives trying to expose all this. Brackets, the same goes for Alan Shefflin, John DeCamp, Skip Clements, close brackets. To investigative journalists like Maury Terry, Roy Blake, Michael Newton, who are the modern day Woodwards and Bernsteins of this issue, as they continue to dig to get to the truth. To therapists like Catherine Gould, Colin Ross, Randy Noblet, Holly Hector, Pam Monday, Pam Hudson, and the countless others going way beyond the, quote, standard hour, way beyond, to help ritual abuse survivors. Brackets, the same goes for Doug Riggs, Len, and Spack. To ritual abuse survivor advocates like Faith Donaldson, Maureen Bruff, Karen Stardancer, Pam Perskin, Bart Lawson, Beth Vargo, Joe Getzinger, Cheryl Knight, Eileen Aveney, Pam DeFries, SAVE, and all the others out in the trenches. To the ritual abuse survivors themselves like Dominique, Gina, Cindy, Kathleen, Dan, Rose, Vanessa, who have not only broken away, but are working with all they have to expose this at great risk to themselves. And if I promised anyone, to you too. Table of contents. Chapter 1, as way of background. 2, where's the proof? 3, are the memories real? 4, Kathy's story. 5, more evidence. 6, daycare ritual abuse. 7, teen involvement. 8, satanic hysteria, ? 9, harassment. 10, more harassment. 11, more evidence. 12, quote unquote, the chosen. 13, cover up in Nebraska, ? 14, brainwashing and programming. 15, marionette operatives. 16, world conspiracy. And conclusion. Forward. The following lyrics are from a lead song about sadistic satanic ritual abuse on Joan Baez's 1992 release, Play Me Backwards. You don't have to play me backwards to get the meaning of my verse. You don't have to die and go to hell to feel the devil's curse. Ritual abuse victims have felt the devil's curse firsthand. Some, with the cold steel of ceremonial knives to their throats, have been forced to chant incessant praise to Satan amidst flickering candles during late-night ceremonies. A defenseless 7-year-old girl felt the devil's curse when she was repeatedly sodomized by black-robed figures in an abandoned backwoods house as part of a cult orgy. Young initiates felt the devil's curse when they were exposed to the cult's sophisticated and systematic electroshock torture, brainwashing and programming. And of course, the devil's curse is felt when observing and or being forced to participate in the ultimate cult homage, a human sacrifice. Miss Baez's song goes on, let the night begin, there's a pop of skin and the sudden rush of scarlet. There's a little boy riding on a goat's head and a little girl playing the harlot. There's a sacrifice in an empty church of sweet little baby Rose. Just before I continue, I'll just say a prayer. This stuff is difficult both to listen to and to read. I'm a survivor myself, but for anybody delving into Satanism for research purposes and for good, it's still worth praying. So, Lord, I just lift up myself and everybody listening to this within the sound of my voice. I pray for your protection, Lord, and your peace and your will to be done with this rare book, with the missing author and his wife, to just reach further afield, Lord, and to achieve the purpose for which it was written, Father God. And I thank you, Lord, for your protection. The baby roses, these sacrifice victims, well, they're starting to surface. The partial skull of a satanic cult sacrifice victim is unearthed in some woods in Massachusetts. The bodies of 4 satanic cult defectors are found brutally slashed in a small town in Salida, California. Brackets uncanny, the murders take place on, of all streets, Elm Street. Meanwhile, in another small town in northern Brazil, the dismembered body of 7-year-old Evandro Kitano is found in a shallow grave. Satanic cult ritual instruments are found buried close by. The cult ring involved with the killing is eventually tied to a 2,000-member linked cult network. Back in the States, 3 8-year-old boys are brutally killed during what appears to be a ritualized incident in Arkansas. Oddly, a short way into the investigation of this case, the satanic ritual aspects are downplayed. The same way it seems they have been downplayed in cases across the country around the world. In Prescott, Canada, an extremely creative team of police and social workers uncover an extensive multi-generational ring of sexual and ritual abuse perpetrators, and the list goes on. So does Miss Baez's song. So I'm praying for protection, smoking out the truth, chasing recollections, nailing down the proof. When Miss Baez refers to here, what Miss Baez refers to here is the increasing number of quote-unquote walking wounded who are deeply scarred by the devastating effects of ritual cult abuse and are trying desperately to recover. For instance, a group of children exposed to sexual and satanic abuse at Fran's Daycare Center in Austin, Texas, carry all kinds of scars, night terrors, night sweats, uncontrolled vomiting, extreme separation anxiety, acting out sexual and or sadistic impulses, such as using knives to slash at eyes in magazine pictures, trying to have sex with another sibling, etc. In this Texas case, daycare center operators were convicted, each sentenced to 48 years in prison. What's more, my investigation has turned up similar daycare and school satanic ritual sexual abuse cases in Oregon, Massachusetts, Florida, California, New Zealand. In each, the children report very similar atrocities: extreme sexual abuse, praying to Satan, drinking blood, watching animal and bay sacrifices, being threatened with death if they tell. Besides the children's stories, there are all kinds of adult survivors coming forward with recovered memories of some of the most heinous cult ritual abuse imaginable. There are people who have often been inexplicably saddled with strong afflictions as extreme chronic depression, extreme paranoia, extreme codependency characteristics, strong suicidal tendencies. However, as the core cult memories are surfaced and worked through in dissociative disorder clinics, private therapy, 12-step ritual abuse groups, and so on, significant marked healing, often for the first time, starts to take place. Also, as some of these cult survivors come forward, they are bringing more than just stories of heinous abuse. This book, for instance, includes a series of interviews with an East Coast Satanic high priest's daughter who reports accompanying her father on trips across the country for the purpose of training regional Satanic high priests in drug running, prostitution, money laundering, torture, brainwashing, and programming techniques. What's more, we're starting to see there are startling overlaps between the Satanic cult brainwashing and programming and the same highly sophisticated mind control technology developed clandestinely by the United States government and other governments around the world. And finally, not only is it becoming apparent the Satanic cults and other sadistic hate groups are networking, but also part of their agenda may include a, quote, full tilt movement intent on world domination. This movement, apparently orchestrated by a very proficient occult hierarchy, appears to be pulling the strings of the sadistic hate groups and covertly, systematically positioning their people in key political, business, and social positions. My original intent was to travel the country, attempting to merely investigate and chronicle a few cases of SRA, satanic ritual abuse. However, the investigation seemed to providentially take on a life of its own and led to more, much more than I ever intended. As part of my research, I've interviewed a former senator who has extensively researched an apparent high-level satanic cover-up, a Santa Clara author, law professor, who has written extensively on clandestine government mind control experiments, one of the directors of the California Ritual Crime Investigators Association, who tracked one of the most extensive and sadistic satanic cults that has as yet been exposed in the United States, the consulting archaeologist for Lucasfilm's Indiana Jones series, who made a startling discovery in the ground below the now famous Southern California McMartin preschool, and many more. I also cite Harvard psychiatric researchers who've done extensive work with the phenomenon of repressed memory. You know, a first glance at this field, I've learned, brackets such a cursory listen to a survivor's story or a first sweep over an evidence site, often doesn't seem to yield much in the way of substantive cult-related evidence. Yet the evidence comes into view when one knows how to line it up properly. The process of seeing the evidence can be compared to working with a computer. At first, all you see on a computer screen is a basic template that just displays the labels for various software program functions. However, if you pick a function and then you double click on it, a whole array of data materializes that had, in essence, been hidden below the surface level. And so it has been with some of the phenomenon of sadistic satanic ritual abuse. Click, viewers hear gruesome ritual abuse stories on Heraldo one afternoon, then turn the channel. Click, Bible and ritual chalice on a nearby shelf. Click, a sheriff's department investigator listens to the 4-hour deposition of an adult cult survivor describing sexual abuse, torture, and murder he experienced as a child. Quote, "We can't do much because of the time lapse, but we'll keep the information on file," the officer perfunctorily assures. Click, a postcard with the face of a missing 4-year-old girl from New Hampshire arrives at the house. Anyone's house. It's thrown away without a second thought. What I decided to do in writing this book was to, in effect, take the time to double click on some of those things. I also interview other experts who have been double clicking as well. And the second click has produced quite an array of data on the next screen down. Bodies, cult member diaries, abduction techniques, mind control programming techniques, all lend more credence to survivor stories in general. What's more, as SRA investigative experts are starting to compare what they are finding on the next screen down, much of the data matches, lending credence to the idea that the groups are also networked and could quite well have a broader agenda. The following pages are an in-depth look at a good cross-section of what's been found when you double-click. Click, click. Chapter 1, as way of background. Consistent reports of satanic ritual abuse started to surface during the 1980s. Brackets, just as consistent reports of childhood sexual abuse or incest started to surface for the first time during the late 1960s and 70s. While it's becoming apparent these types of cult abuses have been around for ages, the horrible stories, repressed memories, are only now surfacing with steady frequency, primarily because only recently has an environment been created to support survivors getting in touch with these type of issues. This environment is partially, if not largely, attributed to improved counseling techniques, better understanding of the psychological effects of extreme trauma, and the evolution of the 12-step recovery movement into the areas of codependency, sexual abuse, and ritual abuse. Note, for those not very familiar with the therapeutic world, it has advanced on a par with, say, how the medical world has advanced. Just as the medical profession has gotten more and more sophisticated in understanding heart conditions, for instance, so it has been with the therapeutic world in understanding and treating the psychological effects of emotional and physical trauma. Transgenerational cults involved in ritual abuse are those perpetuated through family generations. They are not exclusive to Satanism, but they may be based on other forms of religious tradition. Children brought up in such environments often view cult activities as the norm. Power, heritage, and programming seem to keep transgenerational cults flourishing. Some of these cults engage in prayer ritual, mind control, sexual orgies, child sexual abuse, kidnapping, torture, murder, sacrifice. And while proliferation of cult ritual abuse activity is hard to quantify at this point, many therapists, researchers, law enforcement officials, and others I've interviewed over the years believe the phenomenon is much more prevalent than most of us would imagine. According to national lecturer advocate Karen Stardancer, ritual abuse is any repeated, systematic mistreatment perpetuated in the name of an ideology. This abuse may be mental, physical, emotional, spiritual, or sexual, and frequently combines all these types of abuse in an attempt to condition every aspect of the victim's humanity toward the ideology. This happens in satanic cults, neo-Nazi groups, Afro-Caribbean cults, the Ku Klux Klan, gangs. In other words, it's systematically and clandestinely currently going on in all of these types of groups all over the world. This basically means there are apparently large numbers of people being conditioned with hate, dark side ideology, and being programmed to unquestioningly do their various groups or cults' bidding. Note, the next chapter is a graphic look at one of these extensive, quite dangerous cults. However, as a way of preface, according to some pretty high-profile people in our society, what you are about to read really doesn't exist. April 1994, Texas Monthly Magazine. Writer Gary Cartwright reports FBI agent Ken Lanning states, not a single body or body part has been produced. If the satanic cults are real, Lanning observed, they constitute the greatest crime conspiracy in the history of the world. Brackets, bear in mind, this was the same agency that for the first half of the 20th century adamantly said there was no evidence of another organized crime conspiracy, the Mafia. May 10th, 1994. Nationally syndicated columnist Molly Ivins writes, social workers who deal with child abuse have nightmares about the people who come up with patently false, quote, recovered memories of satanic ritual abuse. January 1993, Mother Jones magazine, freelance writer Ethan Waters, quote, critics note, many patients from fundamentalist Christian backgrounds, for instance, have memories of abuse at the hands of satanic cults, despite no evidence that such cults even exist. After reading about some of the following cases, you make the decision about whether those just cited are genuinely knowledgeable, simply misinformed, or quite skilled spin doctors. Chapter 2, where's the proof? Here's some. Slaughter in Salida, the real nightmare on Elm Street. For 51 days in the spring of 1993, the world intensely watched as detail after detail of abuse and cult mind control surfaced from the Branch Davidian compound in Waco, Texas. Just a little less than a year earlier, in a courtroom in Oakland, California, graphic details quietly began to surface about a satanic cult compound that makes what was going on inside the Branch Davidian compound seem quite tame. It was reported there were at least 55 known satanic cult members, stretching into a 3-county area and representing a variety of walks of life. There was a David Koresh type, charismatic leader, brackets high priest. There was extreme code of silence programming, humiliation and subjugation, torture, including electroshock, sexual abuse, murder. In other words, many of the same things satanic ritual abuse survivors have been reporting over and over. What's more, as the story played itself out, there emerged a curious pattern of suppression around one of the key details, a pattern of suppression one has to wonder, perhaps, has happened in other communities as well? Question mark. Think Hampstead. The investigation. It's late fall 1984. A series of burglaries start to occur in Stanislaus County in Central California. Each time a calling card is left, scrawled in blood, quote, "We'll be back to kill you." The notes are also illustrated with satanic symbols, pentagrams, upside-down crosses, 666s. Quote, "You can imagine the trauma to the victims," said Randy Cerny, former Northern California coordinator of the California Ritual Crime Investigators Association. At the time of the burglaries, Cerny was a deputy and gang intelligence coordinator for the Stanislaus County Sheriff's Department. Cerny is one of the officers assigned to investigate the burglaries, and in the process starts to hear rumors of a satanic cult operating in the area. However, nothing more substantive initially emerges. The burglaries eventually stop, they go unsolved. However, Cerny continues to investigate. Eventually, he comes across 17-year-old Mike Long, not his real name. Mike is heavily involved in the occult and Satanism. However, he's trying to get out and he agrees to become an informant. Yes, there is a satanic cult. Yes, they are carrying out ceremonial rituals, bizarre sex, drug running, prostitution. And the cult is headed up by a fanatical but sophisticated leader, Gerald Cruz. With an iron fist, Cruz has the members following some of the teachings of high-profile Satanist Aleister Crowley. Brackets, the same man Hitler was said to have followed. And all members are required to wear satanic medallions under their clothes as a show of allegiance. But Cerny is still unable to turn up any hard data links or corroboration. What's more, he's having a hard time getting other people in the sheriff's office to listen. No one listens, that is, until September 26, 1985, when Tamara Smith, bracket pseudonym, surfaces. Smith is a topless dancer at the Cheyenne Social Club in the outskirts of Stanislaus County. She has come to the sheriff's department concerned for her safety. She is afraid she will be sacrificed by the group, said Cerny, if she refuses to participate in a ceremonial, quote, marriage to the beast, that is, marrying High Priest Cruz. In exchange for protection, she identifies more than 50 people connected to the cult. Some were other dancers at the club, local rock group band members, bartenders, bouncers. But there's more. She also identifies people like a town dentist, as well as a Christian pastor at a non-denominational church who was reported to clandestinely be another high priest in the cult. Smith said the cult was stockpiling guns and explosives and was heavily involved in drugs and prostitution. Smith also said Cruz was involved with physical and sexual abuse of children. Brackets, this would also come out later in the trial, said Cerny. Cerny started an intelligence file on Cruz. The Federal Alcohol, Tobacco and Firearms Division, ATF, also started an investigation because of the report of the inordinate amount of weapons the cult was storing. Cerny started doing some inquiries around the social club and said he did elicit some decidedly paranoid reactions. Shortly after, he received an anonymous death threat warning him against looking into, quote, satanic activity in the area. This was early 1986. There is no more apparent satanic activity until August of the same year. A graveyard in Denair, California, South Stanislaus County, is dug up and a body is removed. However, this also goes unsolved. For the next couple of years, nothing more surfaces. However, Cerny stays visible in his fight against ritual crime. He has retired from the Sheriff's Department and is lecturing throughout the county and country on the issue. He also accepts a spot on the committee for the US Attorney General's first ritual crime investigation task force. In addition, he's developed a close relationship or close friendship with San Joaquin County's ritual crime investigator, Dighton Little. San Joaquin is the next county north of Stanislaus. Little, in fact, is Cerny's best man when he remarries in 1988. Also, like Cerny, Little is quite visible in the fight against ritual crime. In October of 1989, 2 days after the San Francisco earthquake, Little is shot and killed during a drug raid. The raid was at a drug dealer's residence behind Bob's truck stop in Ripon, California. Cerny said this dealer was selling drugs for a man who had been identified by Tamara Smith, back in 1985 as being one of the Satanic cult members. A couple months later, Cerny is called to an abandoned warehouse by San Joaquin law enforcement to investigate a case of animal mutilations. At one point in the investigation, Cerny took an ABC news correspondent who wanted to report on the case in the warehouse. As they approached a makeshift stone altar where the sacrifices had taken place, Cerny froze. Next to the altar was a ripped newspaper headline about his friend's death. The following year, reports of the cult came up again. Law enforcement officials learned they have established a residential compound, brackets homes and trailers, in Salida, California, just north of Modesto. What's more, they are set up right across the street from an elementary school. Cerny said the group had evolved into a white supremacist, militaristic satanic cult. Every night, cult members would be posted as guards. Officials would later learn crews would not let anyone go off the compound grounds without permission. Like Waco's Branch Davidians, who were constantly forced to read the Bible, these cult members were forced to study the teachings of Aleister Crowley and other occultic literature. Cruz was also using sleep deprivation, humiliation, and even electroshock to keep cult members in line. The latter was referred to as the orange cord treatments. That is, a Black & Decker extension cord with the ends exposed were wrapped around testicles and other body parts, while Cruz operated a power switch. What officials would also later learn was though nothing tangible had surfaced in the last 4 years, the cult had continued to carry on the drug running, prostitution rituals. Quote, they were very secretive, says Cerny, a very close-knit, sophisticated group. However, that was about to change. In the spring of 1990, several people break away from the cult. This incensed Cruz, said Cerny, and Cruz decided to make a lesson out of the defections. The cult members who break away move into an apartment on the other side of town. According to Cerny, one night Cruz brings some of his upper circle people together. That night, they play music by the heavy metal band Slayer and pass out, quote, mystical weapons, knives. They then cross town and break into the Elm Street apartment. The defectors are beaten mercilessly with baseball bats and then bludgeoned to death. Cerny said the carnage scene that was left rivaled the infamous Charles Manson Tate LaBianca murder scenes. Each ex-cult member was decapitated. Several days after the quadruple murders, a trail leads back to the cult, and a number of cult members are arrested, including Cruz. The trial. However, strange things start to happen during the trial. For one, Cerny said the Sheriff's Department could not seem to locate some of the back files on the cult, including Smith's 1985 deposition about the cult. Brackets again, Cerny had since retired from the department and was running a ritual crime prevention consulting service. What's more, the prosecuting attorney, James Brazelton, was staying away from any mention of cult aspects, said Cerny. So much so that when an NBC producer flew a crew out from New York to do a story on the cult angle, Cerny said she was told by Brazelton the trial had nothing to do with the occult. Brackets, he was apparently convincing enough, the producer backed off. And the local newspaper, the Modesto Bee, for the most part, referred to the Satanic cult as merely, quote, a group of people, said Cerny. Cerny had several suppositions for why this was playing itself out the way it was. For one, he said the Stanislaus area prides itself on being a peaceful, quote, law and order community. And for several years, it had the distinction of sending more people per capita to prison than anywhere else in the state, said Cerny. There is even a town in the area, Turlock, that for years had the distinction of having more churches per capita than any other town in the nation. Also, said Cerny, this area was starting to see some substantial development as people moved further and further out from San Francisco. Cerny said because of this development and the law and order reputation, he believed some of the powers that be were exerting pressure to downplay the fact that the town had an extremely active, extremely dangerous satanic cult problem. However, defense attorneys for some of the cult members were very interested in talking about the cult aspects, trying to prove Cruz's power over their clients had led them to be involved in the murders. Also, when Cerny was called to testify, all of a sudden, Cerny said, the sheriff's department was able to locate the back files on the cult. Cerny testified at length about the cult activity in general, based on interviews with cult members and a review of detailed cult member diaries. As one example, he talked about an initiation book where cult members had to sign their name in their own blood. Similar to the mafia, this act signifies one is in the cult for life. Defense attorneys also called noted cult expert and psychologist Daniel Goldstein, who interviewed cult members and read through the diaries and court transcripts. As reported in the December 16, 1992 edition of the Modesto Bee, quote, he, Goldstein, called Cruz evil and sadistic, yet considered him a charismatic leader of a religious satanic cult that controlled followers by using fear tactics, sleep deprivation, humiliation, torture, and in some cases, forced sexual acts such as sodomy. Another curious component was Tamara Smith's absence at the trial. Brackett Smith, again, was the one who extensively reported on the cult in 1985. Cerny contacted the sheriff's department about this and was told they had not been able to find her. Cerny said he had a premonition they were not looking that hard. Quote, because they didn't want any of this cult information to come out, he said. The pattern of suppression about occultic aspects on these types of cases sometimes drives me bananas, said Cerny. A short while after the call to the department inquiring about Smith, Cerny was leafing through a newspaper and came across a picture of several fire-gutted buildings in a town about an hour north of Modesto. Carrying things out of one of the buildings was Tamara Smith. The same Tamara Smith. Cerny called the sheriff's department again, and Smith was eventually subpoenaed. Cerny said the ritual evidence that came out during the trial definitely lends credence to what some adult ritual abuse survivors are now reporting around the world. Quote, what if Cruz hadn't been caught, said Cerny. Let's project that 20 to 25 years down the road. Say someone walks into a police department or therapist's office and says, I'm starting to have memories that my dad was the leader of a satanic cult in California. and they would brainwash people, torture them with electroshocks, sexually abuse me, sacrifice animals, kill people. Cerny wondered if that would all be passed off as merely a quote-unquote false memory. He also went on to say he is sure people with the same perpetrating personality traits were around years ago, as were the teachings of such people as Aleister Crowley. And if the cult activity is going on now, he said, why would it not have gone on then? Another significant piece of information came from a private investigator hired by a defense attorney to look into Cruz's family. It turns out his sister and mother were heavily involved in occultic practices as well, indicating there was definitely some type of transgenerational influence, said Cerny. The sentences. 3 of the Salida cult members are sentenced to death, including Cruz. 2 cult members get life. With a substantial part of the, quote, upper circle put away, many feel assured the area will go back to its peaceful pre-cult existence. Then, on October 27th, 1992, Cerny gets a call. It is Tamara Smith's boyfriend. He has reason to believe Tamara is preparing to take his child to ritual ceremony. The aftermath. Shortly after the trial, Cerny appeared on NBC's national talk show, A Closer Look, as part of a panel on the topic of ritual abuse in general. A film crew had taken some shots of the San Joaquin County warehouse where some animal sacrifices had taken place. This was shown at the beginning of the show. That same year, on the evening of December 24th, the 63,000 square foot warehouse burned to the ground. Satanists have matching holidays for Christmas holidays, and Christmas Eve is one of the most important. They, it's a quote, they, the cult, knew by then we knew about the place, said Cerny. What better time to burn it down? The diaries. A number of the Satanic cult members in Stanislaus County kept diaries. Several were entered as evidence during the trial. The following are some of the excerpts from one convicted murderer's diary. As you will see, the occultic influence gets progressively and insidiously stronger with time. Brackets, except for some censoring and clarification of language, the spelling and punctuation have been left unedited. 9/16/88, I was assigned a new book. It's called Mastering Witchcraft. I also got me a magical name, Kronos. 9/20/88. Tonight is a special night. I'm taking my first step towards mastering witchcraft. For the next 3 nights before I go to bed, I will chant the Lord's Prayer backwards. This will release me from my inhibitions. I wake up tomorrow knowing I'm someone different. I will be a young warlock. Note, this cult member was 19 years old at the time of this entry. In Satanism, many things are reversed. There is a backward alphabet. Pain becomes pleasure, good is bad, and so on. This is symbolic of the satanic intention to overturn most everything in society. 10/3/88. He, High Priest Gerald Cruz, showed us the crystal pyramid colors. When shone in your eyes, it looks like the light your third eye sees. 10/15/88, we also made our wheel of doom, a wheel of punishments, but these punishments can enlighten us and make us strong. 10/30/88, we were all talking about moving. We were also talking about ways to take our Cindy and her mum. I don't care, but all I want is to be able to fuck Cindy before we take her out. I love Cindy very much and would not want a one-night stand, But she knows this, and if she would not give me what I want before she died, I would take it. 10/31/88. Today is Halloween. That means Harvest Festival. We honor the dead by eating with them and smoking with them. We also talked about the ancient ones. They were demons who got through to this dimension, which were reincarnated as dinosaurs. 11/3/88, we was going to pull a black mass. We still might. Note, black masses are one of the highest forms of worship in Satanism. They sometimes call for human sacrifice. 11/5/88, I also had an interesting dream. Me and some others would sit in a certain spot and turn into demons. 11/12/88, the next time I fuck up, I have to fuck Snooky, Steve's dog. Note, this is one of the punishments. Memories of forced bestiality are often reported by survivors of ritual abuse. Then Gerald Cruz started getting angry. He told us we would not eat, sleep, drink, shit, or piss. Note, this cult member always talks about feeling overly tired throughout the diary. Sleep and often other forms of deprivation are used consistently by perpetrators to break down the members' wills, making them more malleable. These techniques are also used with political dissidents, prisoners of war, and so on. 11/28/88. Tonight is the beginning of the season of death. 12/29/88. Today we look forward to getting an AK-47, but Gerald Cruz thought it best to invest his money. Instead, we got a Beretta 25 cal. 11/89. I found my sister isn't allowed over here because Darren said. Darren, the sister's boyfriend, thinks I'm brainwashed. 1:30/89. If I do my theory about me astraling, brackets, occult astral projection, all these times and not even know it. Also buy real estate, stocks, bonds, etc., until we have land in all 50 states. From there, spread until we can put someone in authority under us in all 50 states, with them speaking for us. We could run this country, and then soon the world. Note, some occultists attempt to use the practice of astral projection. In a meditative state, they concentrate on another place they want to go, then attempt to travel, quote, out of body through time and space in extremely short periods of time. It seems some people have actually been able to develop this skill, as others have been able to develop other paranormal abilities such as mental telepathy, telekinesis, and so on. Some of these psychic phenomenon, such as telepathy and telekinesis, being able to move objects with the mind, have proved demonstrable in places like Duke University. Brackets, some also believe astral projection, for instance, is demonically aided. Also, although this diary entry is somewhat vague and fragmented, it is apparent the cult ideology has sunk in, and the next stage in this cult member's mind is to proliferate it throughout the planet. Brackets, over time, cult members start to believe their way is not only right, but the only way. 3/6/89. I also went to my dad's house to get some placements for the chart Gerald's doing, quote, Crowley's chart. Note, this again is a reference to one of the most famous Satanists of modern time, Aleister Crowley. 3/8/89. Gerald hurt his neck first thing this morning. It really hurt me to see him in pain. I offered my life as a sacrifice for Gerald's health. Note, this cult member has become so brainwashed and controlled by the high priest that after a while he apparently would have done anything for Cruz and the cult, including murder. And in the early morning hours of May 21st, 1990, at 55223 Elm Street, he apparently did just that. Defense lawyer Paul Ligder would later argue that mind control and fear of crews drove this cult member to help murder the 4 people. Ligda called a number of character witnesses, including the cult member's mother and sister, and 2 former neighbours, who said the defendant was a, quote, kind, quiet, and a good boy, according to a Modesto B article. It took a jury less than 3 hours to find this cult member guilty of 4 counts of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. Mind control. Apparently, this cult member went through a complete personality metamorphosis and in a relatively short time. Stephen Hassan, in his book Combating Cult Mind Control, defines cult mind control as, quote, a system which disrupts an individual's identity. The identity is made up of elements such as beliefs, behavior, thought processes, and emotions that constitute a definite pattern. Quote, under the influence of mind control, a person's original identity, as formed by family, education, friendships, and most importantly, that person's own free choices, becomes replaced with another identity, often one that he would not have chosen for himself without tremendous social pressure. Quote, he takes on a totalized ideology that, when internalized, supersedes his prior belief system. And to take all this to another level, children born into groups like transgenerational satanic cults are indoctrinated from the start, never even having a prior identity, brackets, i.e. not knowing any semblance of normal from abnormal. Thus, the installation of ideology is that much more potent, that much more ingrained. Note, for as, quote, close-knit and sophisticated as the Stanislaus County cult appeared, according to reports, and as you will see in some of the later chapters, it could virtually be considered a minor league baseball team in comparison to some of the ultra highly sophisticated and connected Satanists currently playing on a major league level around the world. Aleister Crowley. Cerny said the California cult was following some of the teachings of Aleister Crowley, one of the most public and celebrated occult, quote, black magicians of modern times. He was born in England in 1875. In 1898, he became a member of the Golden Dawn, a magical society organized by Samuel Liddell MacGregor Martyrs, an occult scholar who had translated works on the Kabbalah, the occult version of the Tree of Life, and magic rituals. Crowley eventually formed his own, quote, magical society, the Order of the Silver Star, and eventually moved to the United States. During a libel trial in the 1930s, public disclosure of Crowley's sensational lifestyle caused him to be denounced as, quote, the wickedest man in the world. In his book, Magic in Theory and Practice, Crowley writes about one of his occultic beliefs, brackets, one apparently held by many Satanists practicing ritual abuse. The blood is the life. Any living thing is a storehouse of energy, varying in quantity according to the size and health. At the death of the animal, this energy is liberated suddenly. The animal should therefore be killed within the circle or the triangle, as the case may be, so that its energy cannot escape. For the higher spiritual working, one must accordingly choose that victim which contains the greatest and purest force. A male child of perfect innocence and high intelligence is the most satisfactory and suitable victim. Note, cult circles demonstrate a symbolic show of unity and are usually formed around the person being abused, tortured, sacrificed. Also, Satanism is the antithesis of Christianity. Much satanic doctrine has been formulated as the reverse of Christian principles. In the Catholic Church, for instance, partaking of the consecrated bread and wine is, quote, eating Jesus' body and drinking his blood, called for in the scriptures. Christians believe the power is in the spirit. Satanists turn this around, drinking the blood of their victims and cannibalizing the flesh, because they believe that's where some of their spiritual power source comes from. Suppression, question mark. Ritual crime investigator Randy Cerny expresses frustration that the cult-related aspects of these types of ritual crimes are often ignored for any number of reasons. Investigative reporter Michael Newton shares the frustration. Newton did extensive research on satanic cult-related crime for his book, Raising Hell, and at the outset of the book he writes, in case after case, authorities have deliberately ignored or suppressed cult-related evidence to avoid spooking judges and jurors. Crimes with clear cult involvement are too often advertised as, quote, only drug-related, quote, simple child molestation, and so on. The pattern of suppression continues with yet another satanic cult-related case in Massachusetts. One of the leaders of a satanic cult there, Carl Drew, was sentenced to life in prison for a ritual slaying, sacrifice. There will be more on the particulars of this case in a later chapter. However, as other researchers have found, Denver investigative journalist Roy Blake writes in his book Objective Evil, Satanic Cults in the US Intelligence, as in what seems like most cases with alleged satanic cult involvement, authorities attempt to downplay the role of Satanism in the crimes. The New Bedford Times reported on September 25th, 1981, that the trial judge in the Massachusetts case had forbidden mention of any satanic cults. The cows were well out of the barn by then, however. Newspapers in the area had printed well over 50 articles mentioning the satanic tie since the Standard Times first reported the deaths might have been related to a satanic cult in the area. In attempting to downplay the satanic nature of the crimes, authorities rationalized that, in the first instance, the crimes were sufficiently heinous to stand on their own merits without dragging the satanic, quote, red herring into the courtroom. The district attorney worried that mention of satanic activity might result in a prejudicial atmosphere that defense attorneys might be able to take advantage of in the appeal process. Likewise, for instance, in the early 1900s, 6 children came forward in Evansville, Indiana, claiming they had been exposed to satanic ritual abuse in school and other community settings. Victim advocate Rick Doninger spoke out publicly about the abuse case in Evansville and aided in getting one of the children to safety, he said. The children's case was never brought to trial. There's a documentary about that. I think it's called The Blue House. If you contact FOJC Radio, David and Donna Carrico, I think they made a documentary about the Blue House in Evansville, Indiana. However, Doninger was eventually brought to trial for his part in trying to help the children, he said. The charges: assisting a criminal and interference. Doninger said he welcomed going to trial as a way of keeping the satanic aspects before the public. However, he said just before going to trial, Doninger's lawyer was informed the judge ruled there would be no mention of Satanism during the trial. Yet despite who knows how many attempts at apparent suppression, Michael Newton also writes in Raising Hell, cult-related killers stand convicted of murder in 23 states and at least 9 foreign countries. Numerous other occultists are now serving time for their, quote, faith through acts of arson, rape, assault, cruelty to animals, and similar crimes. Courts in 7 American states and in Canada have sustained charges of ritual child abuse in the years since 1984. In addition, Newton goes on, cases involving multiple defendants, cults by definition, have been successfully prosecuted in Latin America, Asia, and Africa. In 1989, in a somewhat rural town about 40 miles west of Cleveland, Ohio, 3 young men, 2 aged 18 and 1 aged 20, were indicted for breaking into a cemetery. Excerpts from a Cleveland Plain Dealer newspaper at the time read, 3 Norfolk area residents charged with opening 2 graves, beheading the corpse, and stealing the skulls were part of a cult that had recently gotten instructions on how to sacrifice babies to Satan, Norfolk police said yesterday. Quote, we're taking this very seriously, Police Chief Gary DeWalt said. Quote, they admitted sacrificing small animals to Satan. They said they smashed their heads and drank the blood. One of them has mutilated himself with a knife. These aren't just kids fooling around. According to a May 29th, 1994 CNN transcript, a group of people were arrested in Chicago for the ritual sacrifices of some 40 animals, which were found inside an apartment complex. The report merely said the sacrifices were tied to, quote, religious beliefs. Although it's not clear whether specific satanic worship was involved in this particular case, one has to wonder how many times, say, the media has shied away from the S word because of different pressures, religious prejudices, and so on, just like some court systems have. More background. Also, in research for the book Objective Evil, Satanic Cults in US Intelligence, I think that might be the 3rd book of the trifecta. I think that might be the one that Craig hasn't been able to get hold of. Blake said he had found 2 European sources for transgenerational, quote, super secret satanic cults in the United States. In California, there's good evidence for the existence of Aleister Crowley's Ordo Templi Orientis, the OTO, as early as the 1940s and maybe even the 1930s. Brackets again, the cult in Salida, California, had been following the teachings of Crowley. Charles Manson said Blake had at least some contact with Ordo Templi Orientis, and indeed the, quote, helter-skelter vision of a coming race war was originally one of OTO's teachings. Brackets Temple of Satan leader Michael Aquino, writes Blake, believes the black magic workings of OTO were actually responsible for his birth in 1946. Another possible source for these sophisticated cults in the United States, said Blake, in German, and in fact may stem directly from the occult religion of the Nazi SS. And its successors may help explain the prevalence, for instance, of transgenerational satanic cults in areas of the upper Midwest that have a large German ethnicity. Note, in Satanism in America by Bart Larson and Wendell Amstutz, Aleister Crowley is described as, quote, clearly the most influential occultist of the 20th century and the father of modern-day Satanism. He is the author of The Equinox, the Book of the Law, and Magic in Theory and Practice. Colonel Michael Aquino was formerly tied to Anton LaVey, who is the founder of the Church of Satan and author of the Satanic Bible, which I believe was plagiarized. I have it on good authority from a defected Satanist. Aquino is a lieutenant colonel in the US Army, now retired, and authored the Book of Coming Forth by Night. Aquino established the Temple of Set religion in the United States in 1975. Bracket Set is an Egyptian name for Satan. John Doe number 60. A San Francisco alcoholic drifter tragically became another of these satanic ritual sacrifices in the spring of 1988. According to a May 5th, 1988 San Francisco Chronicle article, Satanic killer Clifford St. John was sentenced to 34 years to life in prison yesterday for gruesome crimes the judge said, quote, would astonish the imagination of Edgar Allan Poe or the Marquis de Sade. St. Joseph, 46, was accused of participating in the torture, mutilation, and ritual murder of a drunken drifter known only as John Doe number 60. The victim had a pentagram carved on his chest, lash marks across his buttocks, a stab wound to his neck, wax in his right eye, and a sliced lip. The naked body was virtually drained of blood. Police concluded that he had died in a satanic ritual. Investigators said that St. Joseph's appeared to be part of a satanic cult that involved men of means in San Francisco's gay community. And there's more. In the book Raising Hell, Michael Newton writes that 9 days after the body was found, police were called to a Stillman Street apartment where they found St. Joseph dressed in a black robe, companion Morris Bork, 26, stripped to the waist, his face daubed with cosmetics, and another man, Edward Spaler, 26, passed out from drugs. In the middle of the room was a 19-year-old man who was lying on the floor, handcuffed and surrounded by candles. A copy of the Satanic Bible sat out on a coffee table. According to the San Francisco Chronicle article, this victim told police he had been secretly drugged, chained to a fireplace, gang raped, and forced into sexual acts with a dog during the 3 days before police arrived. Brackets many of the same components cult survivors report. St. Joseph had apparently intended to sacrifice him to the devil as well, he said. What's more, Newton writes that a San Francisco investigator on the case said he believed even others are linked to the cult and that their victims are homeless drifters, not necessarily confined to San Francisco. Newton concludes by noting the investigator called it a gay satanic cult and that St. Joseph's correspondence reportedly yielded connections with Ordo Templi Orientis, which includes a homosexual 11th degree for members who are so inclined. Unspeakable Acts. Satanism in America co-author Bart Larson has heard some of the most horrific stories imaginable from those who have reported being involved with satanic rituals. Larson was the chaplain at a psychiatric hospital in Missouri for 5 years. Quote, I have had a significant number of people describe in great detail human sacrifices they have seen, said Larson. One of the most horrendous stories was about a teenage runaway boy who was abducted by a satanic cult made up of both teenagers and adults. As part of the ritual torture in this particular sacrifice, it was reported the boy was cut open in multiple places and raped in the knife wounds. This story was relayed to Larson by a teenage youth trying to break away from the cult. Quote, he told me the story, said Larson, because he wanted to get it off his chest. As he told it, there was stark terror in his eyes. Larson said the terror not only stemmed from reliving the horrible incident, but also by revealing it, he was afraid the cult would track and kill him. Larson said often the person relating the story will tremble almost uncontrollably, convulsively cry, retch. Quote, there is so much emotional effect, said Larson. For most of them, there just seems no good reason they'd make this up. Larson said a number of the ritual sacrifice stories he'd heard have included victims who have been runaways, hitchhikers, illegal immigrants, drifters. A highly respected Colorado therapist who requests anonymity, said he had a similar experience in the late 1970s. At the time, he said he was a psychologist at a US Armed Services alcoholic rehab center. He said 2 enlisted men came to him at the same time, reporting they were involved with a satanic cult. They said they'd gotten involved because of all the sexual activity in the cult, but one night they witnessed a human sacrifice and got spooked. They now wanted to get out, but were afraid of the legal consequences, as well as being extremely afraid of what the cult might do to them if they defected. Quote, as they relayed the story, said the therapist, they both looked extremely afraid and extremely guilty. The therapist said he referred them to a lawyer, but doesn't know what became of the situation. I'll leave that there. That's the introduction of the first 2 chapters, and I'll continue on from there. I'm not sure, this is fresh reading to me, so I'm not sure how many chapters or how long this will take, but I'll do my best. AngelasCaches.org is my blog, or you can find me, Angela Power Disney, on YouTube and Facebook, or Angie Power Disney on Twitter. Thanks and God bless.